So we do a lot of work on oil and gas emissions. We've done big studies on that. It's not a big source of ammonia. It's a big source of NOx, which is important to the park as well, and is important to other air quality issues on the Front Range. But ammonia, it's mostly volatile organic compounds and nitrogen oxides that come off those.
So I had a question on the map that's got the capitals on it, the LNP operations. Are there different dots there, and is it registered versus permitted, or am I seeing things? Are they different colored?
They're just sized by the number of.
Oh, that's all it is.
It's all the same color. Yeah, I think it's because it's overlaid on here.
And then with the wildfire map, there's a lot of ammonia that's out, over the eastern plains. Does it get deposited there? Do we have any idea where that ammonia ends up?
Yeah, it depends on what's going on. So at nighttime during this fire, I live in Fort Collins, and some other folks here as well. That plume would often drain down on the surface at night. So then you're probably depositing ammonia in sort of Fort Collins, Loveland, where that plume was laying down. In the daytime, it's blowing more to the east. We did not see high concentrations at the ground during this period, suggesting that this plume was not really in contact with the surface until somewhere further east. It probably, mixed down to the surface and then could be depositing ammonia. Good questions.
And then can we go back to the map of the entire US just real quick?
Sure. This one, yeah.
Yeah, so just I acknowledge that there is a right dot over northeastern Colorado, but just also wanted to show, mention that there's much bigger, brighter spots to the east and west. And I understand that transport is much easier from northeastern Colorado, but just wanted to put it in this perspective. And I appreciate the satellite data.
Yeah, we are not the biggest source of ammonia in the US by any means, but we're really close to the park, which is why we focus on that, why the early warning system focuses on sources in that similar box and so forth. Yeah. Thank you.
So can you then remove that spot and then run a model to see how much, basically a sensitivity analysis to see that if that spot does not exist in Nebraska or Kansas, would we still see the same amount? Or is the modeling just not even that great anyway?
Well, there's that. But that was done back during the Roman studies when we did a lot of work looking at transport from both west and east sides of the park to the park. And there was a model apportionment by source region. So that's all broken out there. The model does have some trouble with the complex terrain getting things into the park. But I think overall it shows you sort of the relative importance of these regions. Thanks. And I'll apologize. I have to go teach in a little bit, so I'm going to leave before I.
To our next. Yep. However you want to do it. Okay. All right, Jim, you're up.
Perfect. Here we go. Hey, thanks for everyone's time this morning. Again, regrets and apologies for not being there in person. The intent in this next 45 minutes is to kick off the review of the 2007 nitrogen deposition reduction plan with the Ag Subcommittee. And so Josh and I are going to be tag teaming on this with some inputs from Christy as well. I did want to mention just quickly the context and knowledge of the context of the challenges of the federal workforce reductions, including implications to the National Park Service. And also potential for additional reductions in force. You've heard, Christy has has retired. Our division lead, Kirsten King, has done so as well. And I'm here to say we're going to kick off this review and stay the course if and until there's additional impacts to capacity for us to conduct this review, and we'll be circling back with this group to adjust accordingly. So stay in the course, but just wanted to acknowledge that situation as we move forward. To that end, here on the next slide, and I think someone's perfect. Someone's advancing the slide for me. In the next slide, this is just what we're going to look at here. Is just a quick reminder of the initiative background, how we got here, the milestone conclusions and status as a reminder, and then dive into the review specifically about schedule engagement, and then the topics listed there, driven in part by those we've committed to in the milestone report, but also in response to comments that we received, many of which were from agriculture. So we've got about 24 slides here. So I think Josh and I were sort of dividing those up 50-50. On this next slide here, just a reminder of the background. On the left, we see a depiction of Rocky Mountain National Park, over 400 square miles of montane, subalpine, and alpine. In general, as you go up in elevation, the increase, the sensitivity of this excess nitrogen deposition increases. As decades and the weight of the evidence of that built, that led to the 2004 petition from the Environmental Defense Fund and Colorado Trout Unlimited, leading to interagency efforts and collaboration and the MOU agencies, the state EPA and the Park Service, and the development of the 2007 Nitrogen Deposition Reduction Plan, which is what our intent is to review. Within that is the 5-year milestone reports. We've of course completed 2012, 17, and we're working to finalize 2022. The 2022 milestone report. And just quickly, there's the reason that hasn't quite been done yet is the leadership changes with the EPA. So it's in their hands, and we anticipate being able to finalize that this year. Nevertheless, it's not preventing us from kicking off and reviewing the 2007 plan. In 2019, we had the Commission's resolution that connected NOx regulations, oil and gas, and so forth, and also acknowledged the value of collaboration, continued collaboration with agriculture, removal of the contingency plan last year, and renewal of the MOU. And lastly, of course, we will be finalizing said report this year. On the next slide, just a reminder of the simple depiction of the deposition coming from a variety of nitrogen emission sources, both on the Front Range, Colorado, and beyond. These things combine into a larger, more transportable particles that make their way over the park and weather systems and create such issues as there's regional haze, there's excess nitrogen deposition. Also, I'd add, NOx, of course, contributes to the non-attainment area and exceedances for ozone that most of us live within this non-attainment area. On the next slide, just a reminder that while this excess nitrogen deposition happens everywhere, Rocky is special for a variety of reasons and is more susceptible. It does receive greater precipitation, greater amounts of the deposition in a highly susceptible ecosystem, the high elevation where there's thin soils, low rates of plant growth, and limited buffering capacity against the impacts of the excess nitrogen, which is in greater detail on the next slide for this ecological continuum, showing on this graph where excess nitrogen deposition, where it goes up, it impacts more and more resources as it exceeds their critical loads. As you see depicted here, the red line is the approximate current deposition. Everything to the left is being impacted, including the diatoms. There's aquatic plant species in the lakes, alpine species composition, lichen tree species, and soil and water chemistry, greater detailed on that on the left axis there. So that, again, this is the driver. The goal of this project is to reduce the excess nitrogen deposition, bring it down to this target load as you see labeled there, which is the lowest critical load that we are aware of. On the next slide is just to acknowledge how we monitor the nitrogen deposition. We use a number of national atmospheric deposition sites, both within and outside of the park, that increases the power of our analysis. We're going to hear more about this from Christy in a bit. On the next slide, just focusing on that, our master data set from Loch Vale, the primary station for this project. We can see in the gray bars there's the annual value since 1984, the annual values of the deposition. Just behind that is the precipitation that is, of course, related to the deposition. And then we use the 5-year rolling average and compare it to the 2007's deposition plan glide path to evaluate the success of this project in part. Kind of the new news, I think it's been shared before with agriculture, the deposition value that was recently available. It's still preliminary for 2023. You can see the annual value is sitting at about 2.25, which then informed the 5-year rolling average at 2.79, essentially 2.8. That annual value is right near the glide path, right? Still a little above, but the 5-year rolling average remains well above it. So again, sorry for ripping through these slides so quickly. It's just we want to remind ourselves of the background and get to the meat of the matter. As we're doing on the next slide here, these deposition trends through 2022. We haven't quite run them for 2023 yet, but on the left-hand side, there's 3 graphs. The lower is precipitation. The middle one is concentration. The green being in total, red being nitrate, black being the ammonium ion, and then the upper one is actual deposition value. So the relationship between these two these 3 is precipitation times concentration equals deposition in the upper graph. And just quickly a reminder that the long and short-term trends themes. Precipitation by and large is stable. Total wet deposition is stable at Loch Vale and most sites. Nitrate from NOx is decreasing to stable depending on the time frame you're looking at. Similarly, the ammonium ion is increasing to stable depending on the time frame. And when you have these things going in slightly different directions, they cross, and that happened in 2012, where now the nitrate the ammonium now exceeds nitrate. You can see that in both the concentration and the deposition graphs in the middle and upper graph. On the next slide here, just a reminder of, you guys haven't seen the final of this yet, but I think these there's the report conclusions from the milestone. We can say that the milestone, of course, in 2022 was not achieved, but progress has been made, as evidenced by the 2012 milestone being achieved. Nitrogen deposition is being stable, and in fact a 15% lower deposition in the last 5 years. NOx regulations, by and large, are not sufficient yet to achieve the goals of this project. Let me just get back here. And as evidence and provided from agriculture surveys, by the implementation of BMPs is relatively high. And lastly, additional emission reductions, of course, measurements and measures are needed to achieve the goals of this project. On the next slide, this path forward, also from the milestone report, is finalization of the 2022 milestone report, conducting a review. We're kicking it off right now. And within that, utilizing data collection and lessons learned to optimize the future success of the project. A review will be completed during the next milestone and included in the 2027 report. We're going to review all key aspects of this project, something we'll dive into here shortly. And we're going to also review the additional emission reductions and management measures to ensure realistic and reasonable progress. And a comprehensive assessment of this plan is also committed to in the renewal of the MOU last year. So we hereby set the stage for to kick off and look at the categories for review on this project. Josh, I believe this is my last. The next slide is my last slide here, and I just want to say, it's important to look at the schedule of this. The fact that we're going to be reviewing this plan between 2025 and 28, including it into the 27 milestone report that will be released in 28 or 28 to 29. What I, just kind of using logic from what I know, there's the potential in terms of engagement with agriculture to leverage the existing Ag BMP group meetings for discussion. I understand that group has been meeting between the larger Ag Subcommittee quarterly meetings, or we could look at scheduling special meetings, ? And whether or not there are other considerations for plan review engagement with agriculture. So hold your thoughts on this right now. We're gonna Josh is going to take over here for a number of slides, introduce some concepts, and we're going to circle back on these things to receive your input with the time that's allowed. At this point, I'll turn it over to you, Josh.
Great, thank you, Jim. Jim kind of covered a little bit of the project background, some of the data that the Park Service collects and utilizes, and I'm going to transition a little bit into the emissions inventories and the regulations that CDPHE and the Air Commission are more responsible for. Some of the things we heard during the public comment period really related to, I'll call it, quality and content of the emissions inventory. Are there things that are missing? Are there things that in the national platform maybe don't apply necessarily to Colorado in a disaggregated way? Vehicle emissions and whether or not ammonia is being emitted, particularly from large diesel trucks, because the converters are not as efficient as we expect them to be, was one of those specific topics. Wildfire contributions, you heard in the first presentation some discussion about what impact wildfires can have on ammonia and transport of ammonia. And so those were two big ones that I think we are interested in further investigating during this plan review and during future milestone reports. And as you saw from the graphics in the first presentation, we've primarily focused on the 9-county Front Range area, the ozone area, when it came to inventories of both NOx and ammonia. But there's probably a need to expand that. With the NEI data, we can disaggregate that to the county level, and we can expand what's included in our report or what's analyzed in our review of these things beyond just that 9-county area. And so, I think maybe expanding, maybe not all the way to the 20 counties that the canoe system carries, but maybe primarily the Northeast corridor might be really interesting to try and understand as we look forward. Just for those that aren't familiar, Jim put together this graphic of the area where we send out the early warning notifications, and then on the left is just a layout of the 9-county ozone non-attainment area. I think an interesting comment or an interesting observation from the first presentation was the change in sulfates and the change in SO2. We are seeing in Colorado a continued transition away from coal-fired power plants. That has two implications, really. It has a reduction in atmospheric SO2, but it also probably moves some of that generation more into the 9-county Front Range metro area from gas turbines. Some of those gas turbines have ammonia injection for SCR control. And so understanding that transition, I think, is going to be another thing to really think about and consider as we look at inventories going forward. So specific to NOx, we develop inventories very frequently for the ozone SIP, for the National Emissions Inventory Platform. We are continuing to update those. We're in the process of finalizing an inventory for our next SIP action, which will happen later this year, which is going to look at projections out to 2026. One of the things we're doing in conjunction with the Regional Air Quality Council is going to look at modeling out to 2030, 2032, and do some, rough estimates of inventories for those future years. And I think that can really feed into this question of what else, what more, what other things should we be looking at as we look at this next 4 to 5 year period. And so, those inventory developments, I think, are going to be really important to the assessment of this project, the assessment of the overall plan. They will be incorporating the rules that have been adopted that are going to be coming into play over the next couple of years. And I'll talk about those on the next slide. We're doing a lot of other work outside of ozone. We have regional haze work, we have greenhouse gas work, we have energy efficiency work. All of those things have some level of co-benefit for NOx, and so and also potentially for ammonia. And so thinking about those types of things, if an agricultural facility were going to pursue recovered methane credits, does that allow some level of nitrogen or ammonia control as part of those systems that capture the recovered methane? So I think there's a lot of very interesting opportunities that we can further explore over these next couple of years. Some of you may not be too familiar with this, but we're undergoing a huge data transformation at APCD right now. The oil and gas system, the OnGAIR system, is a new system over these last couple of years for oil and gas reporting. We're taking all of our old databases that have been around for 20, 30 years and moving them into the Amazon Web Services platform so that they are more accessible. We can write queries against that data rather than having to pull individual PDFs, hand enter that information into some type of a spreadsheet. And so we're going to have a lot more data analysis tools and power coming up over these next couple of years. As Jim kind of alluded to, there's a lot of things going on at the federal level that we don't fully understand right now. People are tired. People are concerned about what this transition is going to mean from an economic standpoint, from an environmental standpoint. We don't know exactly what this is all going to look like, but it's going to play into what we do from a regulatory standpoint, what we potentially would consider from a voluntary standpoint, and the future of these conversations. So just wanted to acknowledge that as well. On this slide, I'm not going to go through them all one at a time, but this is just a few of the rules that we've put in place over the last couple of years at the Air Quality Control Commission. There are specific rules that are going to impact this Front Range area in the northern portion of the state, specific to oil and gas as well as stationary engines. Those things are going to have benefit towards the NOx fraction that we see transported up to the park. There were some advanced clean trucks and Colorado clean cars that are leveraged off the California waivers. And then we did some work with vehicle inspection and maintenance programs to modernize some of that stuff as well. And so this is a list of a couple of the things that we have done. There will be more coming. We haven't solved the ozone problem, so we have to continue to get NOx reductions and significant NOx reductions in the coming years. And kind of the questions that we've been thinking about a little bit as we start to think about this review of the project is, how far are we going to get that NOx fraction to decrease? How quickly can we get it to decrease? Are there limiting factors related to NOx that will impact the transport of ammonia, and how do those interplay? And then obviously the future on NOx regulations, and we do think those will continue to benefit the park. The quantity of that benefit, I think, is not yet determined, and so that's a big part of what we're going to be looking at over the coming years. From the emissions inventory perspective for ammonia, we've already talked about vehicles and smoke, potentially the underestimation of the NEI for the vehicle fraction. There were significant changes in methodology between 2017 and 2020. We did not, during the last report, go back and try to recalculate 2017 under the new methodology. I think it's probably safe to say there's not going to be a tremendous amount of methodology changes coming out of this federal administration. Things are going to just kind of stay as they are if they even come out at all. So I think one of the things we're going to be thinking about is the NEI data the right data? Is there an opportunity for better Colorado-specific or process-specific emission factors that we could develop in collaboration with this work group? And what would the benefit of that be? What would the workload of that be? It doesn't come without work. It doesn't come without collaboration and contribution from the people in this room. But that might be something that is very valuable to do when we're starting to really think about these complex interactions, transport on specific atmospheric patterns, and thinking about how to utilize that early warning system in the best way possible to try and benefit the park. Part of the thing that I think would need to understand is a better, level of county level demographics, whether that's head of cattle, pounds produced, acres farmed, other metrics. I think, we are not intending to try to get to a producer specific type of factor. I think that is a tremendous amount of work that we may not have enough data to be able to get to that level. But I think if we could look at county level metrics to start and then try to, zero in on areas that we think have the most impact on the park, that seems like a logical next step to be thinking about as we look at this plan review. And I just want to acknowledge again all the work that you all have put in to these BMPs. I know Bonnie's going to talk a little bit more about some of the work that's gone on and kind of next steps and things like that. But I think we have heard in the comments that there are spike years, there are good years. Trying to understand the difference in those years. Were there difference in the underlying data? Was it difference in weather patterns? Was it, what are the causes of those things? I think are the things that we don't fully understand right now, and some of the areas that we want to explore as we move forward. The efficacy and the efficiency of these processes, of these BMPs that you all are working on at the facilities. I think those are things that we would like to better understand. And, this gets back to, can we create more county level Colorado specific emission factors that are going to be representative of the emissions that we're seeing in the atmosphere, but also of emissions that are being transported up to the park? Do we need to expand focus area? You showed a couple slides earlier in the prior presentation about, where some of these facilities are located. And maybe it's not an expansion to the entire 20 county area, but maybe it's an expansion, along the I-70 corridor up towards the Northeast Colorado. I think we're open to conversations about if it should be expanded and what is the right level of expansion that would be valuable to the park. And then, thinking about the early warning system and how that's used and how can we collect data to understand individual events. We do kind of a retrospective look back at, what has happened, but if there was an opportunity to collect a little bit more real-time response to what did the producers do when those early warnings came out, I think that could be very beneficial to understanding kind of this episodic nature of the deposition that's happening at the park. So with that, I think this is where I turn it back over to you, Jim, or to Christy. I'm not sure who is doing
Perfect. It's me. Diving into the next slide here, it's the also of interest to agencies. Agriculture was looking at the glide path. The goals, measures, metrics. That means the slope, time, for the 5-year rolling average versus glide path evaluation method. So a couple of statements and categories to look at here. We do foresee us maintaining the 1.5 kilograms per hectare per year as the resource goal. That's something that is consistent in the literature and throughout the Rockies. Connecting the dots between like NOx and ammonia with regulations and BMPs and things. If we do a great job with that and understanding what's achievable, well, maybe we can look at what is set a goal or look at what like a realistic target load. That's what's achievable, but that is maybe easier said than done given the level of uncertainty. But we will let's see where that conversation goes. Also, it's worth looking at on whether to add years to the glide pass. so that would make a more gentle slope. And but how do we justify that? Just because we may not meet a goal, that's not like a great reason to kick the can out. Just to acknowledge the how the original glide path was set was considerations for ecosystem recovery. We want to do this fast versus like reasonable progress, resulting in the goal to 2032. And we need to keep in mind that deposition is cumulative in those impacts to the ecosystem. But with justification, there's the potential to add years to the glide path. Milestone evaluation, we've been using 5-year rolling average and versus the glide path, as we saw on a previous slide. Is that still the best method? Well, I don't foresee like getting rid of that, but there's a potential to hoping this makes sense, to normalize the wet deposition by precipitation. In other words, used total concentration as a measure to understand our successes. Something that I'll expand upon a little further on the next slide. Don't go there yet. There's also the need, we think, for additional analysis to understand the spikes in 2013, 21, and the future, and whether or not to consider these as like exceptional events. If I'll say if you consider the spikes as exceptional, you also need to look at the valleys, the low years. So however, there is potential, and we will be looking at that. In addition, and lastly, evaluating the addition of dry deposition considerations for goals and milestones and resource goals. This project began, and it remains anchored in, of course, wet deposition, because dry was so difficult to understand and measure. Understanding and methods have improved over time. The dry deposition could be as much as 25% or more of the total nitrogen budget. So we think it's worth taking a look at that and folding that in if possible. Just reflecting quickly on the next slide, the potential to include the total nitrogen concentration to consider here. These are kind of a blow up of the graphs that you saw before. Reminder: the lower one is precipitation times the middle one. Concentration equals the top one. Focus in on the middle one now. The green line there is that total concentration values. That is a little smoother than the upper green line, which is the deposition values. And the reason for that is that it's normalized with per precipitation. So what it does is remove it. It moves it more towards the influence of emissions rather than the deposition itself. Something, if needed, Christy can expand upon. But this is partly in response to agriculture's concern about the actual deposition values being so influenced by precipitation. So we're gonna look at this. There's also, should we put a glide path on concentration? ? We'll see how far this goes, but it's something that we think may be of value to understand, fold into the evaluation of this project. On the next slide, I'm going to let Christy talk about the future in NADP.
This is Justin. I had a couple of questions about your first two slides. If you'd scroll back, the first one. Can you hear me, Jim?
I can.
Okay. So I guess the overarching thing I heard is we committed to looking at this process, but it feels like you're hedging your commitment on each one of these issues. MOUs came to AG and asked us to support the dissolution of the contingency plan, and the agreement was that we would look at this, and you start off by saying 1.5, it's not going to change. And then you go on to the rolling 5-year average, well, we can look at other things, but we're going to keep that. And then we go on to several other things, and it just feels like, are we really committed to looking at this? And are we really committed to stepping back and saying, are the assumptions we've made necessary, or are they correct? You know, you said, do we have justification for the glide path? The glide path was chosen in the target date of 2032. Yes, was chosen for the benefit of ecosystems, but I can't remember any data that says the park is going to be destroyed by 2032 that we can point back to. The intent was to benefit the ecosystems, but I don't know that there was any cliff we were going to fall off of with that. And it just feels like the MOUs are now hedging themselves, saying, well, we'll think about this, but we'll think about this, but. And it's frustrating as an ag producer who's been at the table for 15 years on this deal and have tried to cooperate, and we make an agreement to look at something, and then the MOUs come back and continue to hedge themselves and say, well, we'll do this, but. And I guess, I don't know, I'm just voicing frustration with what I'm hearing there, with all of the buts.
Justin, thank you for being brave and honest as usual with this here, and this is exactly the feedback that we want to hear. And I mean, I'll say each one of these are worth further conversations. And forgive me if I have made things sound too certain for each one of these bullets. And we want to hear Ag's perspectives to figure out where we're going to go with each of these. The nuances that I covered just quickly was, was maybe partly my own opinion, but let's figure out where to go from here, in our time that we're going to engage through the potentially the BMP Ag group. So nothing is set in stone. It's all a conversation move forward as we decide where this is going to go.
Yeah, I would just add that it's a list of things that we are planning to consider, but we do not have an answer for you today on what we're going to do with each of those bullets.
And I'm good with that.
Yeah.
I was hearing, we're going to consider it, but we really don't think that we need to adjust this, or we're not open to really making an adjustment. We'll talk about it because we committed to talk. And if we're just going to talk about it because we committed to, and we're not really seeking the best data to drive our decisions, it's a waste of freaking time.
Yeah, I don't think that's what Jim was trying to say.
No, but that's how it comes across.
And honestly, I had thoughts just.
Okay, so let me just clearly say that these bullets are up here to be considered, not to be decided on today by this group, but to have a deeper dive into each one of those bullets. The only bullet that I heard Jim say any certainty on was most likely not going to move that 1.5 critical load. Might we come up with a higher target load? That's a possibility. But the 1.5 critical load is supported by the literature throughout the Rocky Mountains from south to north. And so for us to adjust that number, we would have to have new research for that.
I just, not to beat a dead horse, but I also heard, well, we can talk about the glide path, but can we adjust it? And we talked about when we're at the 5-year rolling average and looking at annual deposition, something that's more accurate. And we might be able to do that, but we're going to hang on to the 5-year rolling average too. And so it's like, are we willing to?
If that came across, I don't think that was what Jim meant to say. Is that is definitely up for consideration.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. But Jim.
Thank you, Christy, and forgive me. It's a little difficult to track all the conversations in the room there, but if I heard it, I just want to voice agreement that each one of these is open for discussion and critique, which is the specific reason that we are kicking it off and plan additional conversations with Justin and all in the room.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, we'll move on. We've had some challenges with monitoring. We foresee that we will continue to have challenges with monitoring in the future. The NADP site at Comanche Meadow on the western slope of Rocky Mountain National Park was closed in February of this year due to the lack of staffing by the Park Service employees that were running that site. The NADP site at Pawnee on the Eastern Plains stopped collecting samples last year and has not been restarted. I was maybe going to ask somewhere else after the meeting or in a break and see if you know anything more than I do. Peter Kleinman with USDA was supposed to start that site up, and I have not heard back from him for a couple months. In addition to that, we're all facing a federal budget crisis. The NADP program is funded largely by federal agencies. The Park Service is the third largest contributor to the 200 site network. In order to sustain budget cuts, the NADP is looking at moving from weekly sampling to 2 weekly sampling. This definitely affects, the time resolution of samples, potential losses of nitrogen in the bucket, but it might be the only way to continue to have a national monitoring network in the future. We recognize that the sites at Rocky are very important to this process, and we are looking to request from NADP that a certain subset of sites continue to sample on the weekly basis. That's for the early warning system, as well as Brett's data substitution model works much better for weekly sample. Things are changing rapidly. Since this slide was finalized yesterday, Park Service has learned that 5 of our contracts have been canceled. One of those contracts includes our contractor that subcontracts to Lisa Foster, who collects the sample of the Blackville for us each week. So that likely will be impacted as well. And we're looking to get those contracts reinstated, but uncertainty continues. Okay, back to you, Jim.
Yes, and so lastly here is the meteorological implications. And there's some future scenarios. All future scenarios include a increases to precipitation, and of course that is important to deposition. And as seen in the statements here, could it be anywhere between 1 and 35% increase? That equates to what, 0.4 and to up to 12 inches of precipitation, and that can, as I said, have consequences to potentially increasing deposition depending on the pattern of the storms that are coming in. I think it's familiar to the group where if you have a long storm, it's a lot of the pollutants are scavenged from the atmosphere early on in the storm, and the latter part is cleaner. So that's why the pattern of the additional precip may matters, as well as just the net increase anticipated from future scenarios. So this ends the kind of the topics that we had in mind, at least for the 2000 plan review. You're welcome to add. I mean, structure it, Josh, if you since you're sitting in the room there. But what I had in mind was just opening up to agriculture, reflecting back on previous slides, but keeping in mind we also want to understand. I think it's very important to understand how we might engage with agriculture efficiently after this meeting.
Jim, there's a comment in the chat asking about the time frame of the meteorological projections.
Yeah, this is something that's not. I'd have to look back and consult with our other division on here that developed that report. Um, I don't have an answer for it right now, but I'll certainly get one.
Yeah, Jim, this is Bonnie. So I got, I think, kind of two initial reactions here. First off, I'm hearing a huge ask from this group in this process. A lot heavy lifting, a lot of commitment from this group. So that's just one thing. The other thing that I feel like is missing is there was a pretty simple ask, I think, from the public comments that there be a little more transparency with the lock-fail data, and that you guys show that there are years that did not meet the NADP completeness criteria, just like you show for every other location. I understand that lock-fail has a better substitution methodology, but I still think that we need to acknowledge that for most of the time we've been measuring at lock-fail, we've missed a lot of data. We've missed a lot of deposition. So it's still, I think there's was this ask for this acknowledgement that that's not, it's represented as we know exactly what fell up there. We know exactly what was collected in that bucket, and that's not accurate. So I think I'm surprised to see that that's was not incorporated. It seems like a pretty easy thing to do. And I'm, again, surprised that it's not incorporated in it, because I think that's one of the issues that has been repeated over and over in this group is it's presented as gospel, but there is a lot of uncertainty built into even that data. And we didn't start meeting that completeness criteria until 2011. We missed it in 2013. We missed it in 2014. I mean, I think that's important. And I think it was an easy ask that be. I'm curious as to why not.
Christy, do you have a quick response to that? I mean,
Yeah, I
we
think
did
we were
press go ahead.
planning to include that in the next milestone report. It's my fault that it's not on the glide path that Jim is showing today that has been shown to this group before. We can certainly include that information with an oversight. Sure.
I am sorry. I'm sure it's not all time. I appreciate that.
And yeah, forgive me, I can't hear exactly what's in the room. You know, I just want to say, just because it's not in this presentation, doesn't. I mean, we're here to have an exchange of information. So to Bonnie's point, if there's things that we're missing that should be considered and included, that's what we're here to talk about. This presentation is not an exhaustive list.
Jim, this is Justin again. One thing that came to mind after you talked about the precipitation maybe increasing. We didn't ask for this as part of the review process before, but your phone spurred it on. Trying to understand better, does deposition, if all things are equal other than precipitation, does deposition with low precipitation and some amount of deposition with high precipitation yield the same ecosystem effects at the park? I think I can remember back there being some discussion about in high precipitation years, the nitrogen is flushed out of the system, for lack of a better scientific explanation. But if the park is forecast to have higher precipitation in coming years, trying to get our arms around and that leads to higher deposition, is that deposition being higher as critical as it is in lower precipitation years because of concentration? I hope that makes sense.
Yes, and what I'll say, what I'm flagging here, just in my own notes, and Christy, if you could be sure to capture, is doing we spoke to it to some degree about ecosystem recovery, after we've gone down below the relative critical loads, which is, I think, related to your question. But we need to do a better job with that, including what you're talking about is like this pattern, and tell me if I'm off base, like this pattern of precipitation. If there's bigger storms, the wetter resources I mean, there can be more of a like a flushing effect from the wet resource, water, lakes, diatoms, and so forth, where the nitrogen is flushed out of the system much sooner than other resources, the soil, vegetation, where it's going to sit and just sort of bake there for a while. So to do a better job explaining that in light of the additional precipitation that is expected is what I'm flagging here.
Along those lines. I also think that this concept of normalizing the wet deposition data by precipitation, and whether that's annual or that's the long-term record or that's 5 years, 10 years, or whatever is decided, it will help counteract that metric, right? So I do think that that's one of the main things that we plan to look into and see what makes the most sense.
Just to make things a little bit more complicated here. In general, I'm not sure about exactly the highest elevations in Rocky, but in general, the projections, if there will be more precipitation in Colorado, it's projected to be in the winter, not so much in the summer, which complicates things a little more, because that tends to not be when the big deposition events, or at least the big deposition events from the Eastern Plains, tend not to be in the winter. They tend to be in the spring and summer. These climate projections are for precipitation are kind of all over the place too. So it's a little hard to say, but that signal is pretty consistent among the climate models, that like if it's going to get wetter, that will mostly come in the winter time.
I want to speak on what Jim. I mean, that brings up the point about state normalization. Is it?
That brings up a really good point about precipitation normalization. Does it need to be normalized annually as we look at the numbers, annual deposition and annual precipitation, or does it need to be normalized by event, precipitation associated with deposition on this day or this sample? So keeping that in mind would have a big effect on what Schumacher is saying, when that precip comes relative to deposition. So.
Right.
We just want to be run by.
And forgive me, just checking in with Brian time-wise here.
Yeah, we're a little long, but this is a good conversation. So let's just go another 5 minutes, and then we want to transition.
Sounds good. If someone would please respond to about like future engagement and their thoughts on that.
Thank you.
Chrissy, my question is, because I have one of those NOAA to me in my yard, and I gather the data once a month and shoot it out. So my question is, doing the monitoring and sampling discussion, is there something we could put in those buckets? Because I know that when I take a sample for nitrates, I put a little acid in to ship it to the lab to test. Is there something that we could put in those buckets that would hold that nitrogen, a little longer if we have to go to a 2-week sample?
Great question. So NADP has been evaluating a new side sampler to get at total wet deposition. So that includes the organic end and preserving that organic nitrogen. So basically what that looks like is a little cylinder that attaches to the NADP bucket, and then acid is added to that bucket so that the nitrogen remains more stable. The problem is that if you add the acid, it affects all the other ions that are also measured by NADP. So we can't just add it to the big bucket. They have been trying, and in fact, Jeff was here. They're going to be doing a study looking at this type of sampler at CSU, probably starting in the next couple of months. So unfortunately, it won't be in time to deal with the current budget cuts that are coming, but it is something I think that will be important and potentially very useful to this project moving forward.
Thank you. Just wanted to address the, Bonnie.
Sorry, Jim, what you missed in the room is I did say to Christy that I am very sorry for what you guys are going through. I'm sure it's not a fun time to work for the federal government. And I do have a lot of sympathy for you, but you're asking about specifically engagement. And so this group is the only group that has been at the table. We're an important group. I get that. We're close to the park. It's very easy for ammonia to go to shoot straight up there. We're at the mercy of these synoptic weather events. But one of the things this group has long asked for is what about out-of-state sources? You know, you guys are asking for a lot from this group. But the thing is, I don't think that this group alone can get that deposition driven down to that 125. I think we'd have to wipe ag off the face of the map, and we'd have to return to pre-industrial conditions to get to pre-industrial deposition. I don't know if that's true or not. There's a lot of technological advancements, but you know, sometimes it's kind of hard to commit when we're the only folks at the table. So I would also like to see a little bit more of like what is expected of us. Are we still expecting that this group will get us to that 1.5, or are we going to acknowledge that we can maybe get, you know, what kind of deposition reduction could we expect from this group? And I mean, I think everybody here is committed and is willing to stay at the table, and you know, but there is a lot of asks in there from this group. So I can't, you know, that's just my opinion coming from a different perspective now. So
yeah, and let me just say quickly, you know, there's a bullet on slide 19 we included specifically for that is the assessment of what's achievable with considering with work with this group. As we had mentioned before, I mean, and all of this is open for I feel like I need to say all of this is open for discussion, but it's this idea of continual optimization of BMPs demonstrating from agriculture as doing their part to contribute to this project. Optimization is in our guiding principles. Now the tough thing is defining what that is. And I think it could and should be based in the degree of which these are implementable, the degree at which BMPs can be implemented within the focus area, and that can vary by BMP. But it's something that this group is I think you're working on by developing the BMPs and their efficacy, and you know what can and can't be implemented versus you know what percentage maybe might be expected of producers that are implementing said BMPs within the focus area.
Curious to go back to the Romans study and look at the source apportionment conclusions that were drawn back then. And this is really to Bonnie's point to put numbers around it. The contribution from beyond Colorado varies seasonally, according to the published reports. But in the summer period, only about 55 to 60% of the ammonium and about 75% of the ammonia and gas are coming from, according to this report, Colorado sources. And so leaning on Colorado sources to come up with all of the delta to get to 1.5, when almost half, at least during the summer, is coming from out of state. That's an interesting question.
As our time winds down here, let me ask specifically, may we leverage the existing BMP group meetings for discussion and or further discussion on this plan's review?
I'm asking a different question for now. Hold on. This Roma study, what's the last one that was conducted and when? 2014. So is it time to have another one?
Maybe that's when the papers came out in 2014.
Okay.
I was.
So it's been a while.
Yeah.
15 years since the
15
source
years.
apportionment by Schichtel et al., 2010.
So what would it take then to do this again? Yes.
You might be surprised to learn it will not be the federal government that will be funding this study in the future. So if other researchers want to take that on, that would be amazing.
Definitely. You would know what would need to be done.
And I'll just say that, you know, I don't think we realistically think that this group is going to get us all the way down to 1.5. We understand that there are sources outside of this group, but we have to start with this. We cannot go to Nebraska and Kansas and say, help us solve the problem at Rocky until we can show what Colorado has done. So, you know, we're starting with the sources closest to Rocky, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't loop them in at some point. You know, I think that definitely should be done. But, you know, we have to start here.
Thank you for saying
Oh, sorry.
One more comment. I would disagree about your Iowa and Nebraska. Marguerite and I sit on a National Pork Producers Council Air Task Force. So we are addressing that with our neighbors. So I say this is what we're doing, but we're seeing from that very first slide that Dr. Colette shared, you guys have a lot of impact to what's going on here in Colorado. And we would like for you to see what you can do to help us maintain what we need to do. So.
Thank you for that.
And maybe with those connections, we can branch out. That would be great.
Yeah, and then just final comment before we move on to the next topic. The state has put in to continue facilitation of these meetings into our budget for the next fiscal year. And so we would really like to continue this type of dialogue with facilitation because we think it's really valuable to charting the path forward for this project. Yeah, one of the things we've been thinking about is because we were not able to get a couple of the BMP meetings in over this fiscal year, we do still have a little bit of budget left. We could potentially put in a meeting in June, a virtual meeting to close out that budget and also continue the conversation that we've been having today. Maybe get into more specifics on individual topics and path forward on those topics.
To finally get around to answer your question, Jim, about can we use that BNP subcommittee as our meeting to have further discussions about this? I was going to offer up and say, yes, I think we can, at least for the first time, and see if that fits. But with what Josh was just saying about an additional meeting in June, to me, that makes more sense to have that meeting in June and drill down on this discussion of where we go as we look at reviewing all of this process. I guess that would be my vote.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, so let's continue to priority on that. All right, we're a little behind, but
I'm going to recover a lot of time for you.
okay. Do you want to come up here? I didn't get any slide from you. So. Okay, good. Yeah, please take the.
The update here is that we've concluded the originally proposed work that that Greg's office helped us get funded through NRCS, and then the Colorado Livestock Association really came to the table with some significant matching funds to help us do the work. 1 week from Saturday, Mr. Lee becomes Dr. Lee. He was the one that did a lot of the heavy lifting on our BMP study, looking at sprinkler use to suppress ammonia emissions for short time periods. I've presented our interim conclusions to this group in the past, but just to rehash a couple of things. We do confirm what Ms. Gallus put in her 2011 thesis, that it is a plausible BMP, that sprinkler application of water does appear to reduce temporarily the emission flux of ammonia from an open lot surface. We did a lot of that work was what we would call in vitro work, 1 meter by 1 meter test chambers with simulated feed yard surfaces and synthetically derived urine from chemical reagents and all that. So highly controlled studies in order to show what is achievable with 5 millimeters of sprinkled water. Now, is there anything sacred about 5 millimeters? No. And in fact, one of the major questions that has arisen, what is 5 millimeters? 5 millimeters, roughly 1/5 of an inch. That would be a reference depth, maybe a central tendency depth when sprinkler systems are used for fugitive dust control. In cattle feed yards, you'll see anywhere from 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch, depending on how much water they got and how much they're willing to use for this purpose. So 1/5 is right in there. So that's about 5 millimeters. That's when it's used for dust control. And there's no obvious reason that 5 millimeters would be the optimum for ammonia suppression. And that's indeed one of the questions that has arisen as a result of the work that NRCS and CLA funded with Texas A&M AgriLife Research. We have concluded the project. We've submitted our final report to NRCS. They've asked for a couple of revisions that will not change the principal conclusions, which are, yes, it is a plausible BMP. It works on the benchtop. We can achieve control efficiencies, reductions of up to maybe 20% in vitro when everything is controlled really well. We can't control things really well out in the field. And so that 20% is a ceiling of achievability as a best case scenario. Now, a couple of other conclusions. We dissolved different levels of aluminum sulfate into the water to see if that enhances the effect. Wildly effective if you use enough of it. Ka-ching, ka-ching, ka-ching. Right? And we have no idea what the net effect of putting additional aluminum sulfate out on the pen surfaces would be. Hoof health, who knows? Animals, the livestock will eat manure, they'll eat all kinds of stuff on the feedlot surface. We don't know anything about that, and I wouldn't want to speculate as to what those effects, those ancillary effects might be. Those need to be investigated. So what we're planning to do is submit a proposal tomorrow, in fact, to carry forth on additional in vitro studies that allow us to kind of go beyond this arbitrary 5 millimeter level and do some other things as well. Look at different depths, different coverage efficiencies. Feed yards, sprinkler systems don't cover 100% of the open lot area. In fact, they preferentially avoid areas near the feed bunk, the feed and the feed apron, where water already accumulates to a greater degree and there is therefore wetter. Sprinkler systems, we don't want them throwing water up there. So anyway, the coverage of sprinkler systems tends not to be 100% of the area. In fact, it might be less than 50%. Does that have a role? Does that have something to say about the net effectiveness? Yes, unquestionably so. Now, that's a strong word to use, unquestionably. And the reason I use that word is because we got a chance during the last year on 2 commercial feed yards in Colorado to evaluate the use of sprinklers in a longitudinal fashion in time, by which I mean the following. Turn the sprinklers off for a while, let things, and measure ammonia as best you can while the sprinklers are off, then turn them on for a week or two and take the measurements. Turn them off again, let things dry out, settle, and see what the effect appears to be. And we had 2 feed yards, and I would say a fairly, we characterize these as demonstrations, not as replicated research. Okay, so that's a real important factor here. But we were not able to see the signal in the feed yard setting that we saw in the in vitro work. Okay, but we did have some rain events in the meantime. And we found that with enough water uniformly distributed over the feed yard, we could pick up an effectiveness. So that is why I say it is beyond question to me that percent coverage of the surface and the depth of water applied will be important levers. Now, they won't be terribly important levers for sprinkler systems that already exist, that have been designed and installed. Retrofitting is wildly expensive. And for this particular application, I'm just going to go out there and say I wouldn't recommend it as a cost effectiveness. It's just too damn expensive to retrofit a sprinkler system. But if I were asked to design a sprinkler system to achieve both dust control and ammonia suppression, temporary again, I think we could come up with better ways of doing that. I doubt that we're going to install new sprinkler systems for ammonia control based on the work that we've done. Justin?
The response somewhat linear with coverage. So if a facility has a sprinkler system that covers 50% of the pin surface, and you find that from your rain work that 100% coverage with X percent of moisture reduces it by 5%. Mm-hmm. If you've got 50% coverage, you reduce it by 2.5%, or is that oversimplifying?
At the moment, Justin, I'm going to hedge and say maybe. But I've got 35 years or so of training in suspecting that things are not going to be linear in these kinds of variables. For example, I just a couple of minutes ago during the previous conversation, I pulled up the 2008 report from Andy Cole and Rick Todd about how much nitrogen is emitted to the air in the form of ammonia from cattle feed yards just on a seasonal basis. What is kind of a landmark study out of 2008 on a 60,000 head yard, something like that, 55,000 head yard. And it was pretty clear that, 33% of the ammonia emissions are emitted during the colder months, and 65 to 70% are emitted during the warmer months. And the average is half of the nitrogen fed goes off as ammonia. That's a reasonable rule of thumb, right, to start with. But that's predicated on feeding 13.5% crude protein. It's not linear with crude protein. It's not linear with crude protein fed. So if you reduce crude protein fed, and maybe I'm beating a dead horse here too. I just want to elaborate on this point one last moment, and then I'll yield the floor. When we went from 13.5%, which would be kind of like an NRC guidance level, crude protein in the diet, down to 11.5%, yeah, you reduce the ammonia emitted, but you also reduce the performance of the animals. You go beyond 13.5%, you may not affect the performance of the animals so much, but there's a lot of excess nitrogen being fed that is then being excreted. And so as you decrease crude protein, you might decrease in a linear fashion the ammonia emissions. But as you increase beyond some optimum level, it's going to race off like this. Am I making sense? I see a few people not.
Yeah. Looking at emissions per unit of production, not per head, but per pound of milk or per pound of beef.
Yep.
Because that's the only way to capture the efficiency of nitrogen utilization, protein utilization, and animal performance increases and technologies we've implemented to get more efficient. So,
So, AgNext, I think they're doing stuff about feeding the animals different foods so that they emit less methane. How is that a complementary work, or is that making us worse and them better? How can we make
Great
sure we're
question.
all going in the same direction?
Great question. I'm not going to give you the exhaustive answer. I'm going to defer to others, but I will say it's next generation work because we've been increasing our nitrogen use efficiency like gangbusters using technology for the past 40 years in all livestock production. Concentrated livestock production is predicated on the idea, to a large degree, that you can achieve great economies of scale, apply technologies, and reduce emissions, increase the efficiency, and make it more profitable. I mean, that's the model. And when I buy expensive nitrogen to feed to animals and then flush half of it off to the atmosphere, there's a powerful incentive there to use that nitrogen more efficiently. That is already baked in to a great degree in the livestock production sector. Is that a fair enough answer? I mean, does that answer your question deeply enough? I mean, you asked about carbon, and what I'm saying is carbon, we've been working on carbon for a long time as well. I'm just saying in nitrogen, those technological improvements are already baked into the technologies we already implement. So there's not a lot of additional room. Is there room for improvement? Sure. But we're, if you look at the diminishing returns, we're way out here. We're going to spend a lot more money for a little bit of effect on nitrogen. And I should point out also that there's a there are biophysical limits to how efficient we can make these animals. Biophysical limits. In other words, ecological systems have to have redundant pathways. Redundant pathways are inefficient, but they confer a stability to the system. A ruminant animal is a brilliant example of that, but every ecosystem has that same characteristic. If it is a stable system, it has multiple pathways and therefore has to have some embedded inefficiency in order to confer that stability. Does that make sense? Okay. Yeah, this is the whack-a-mole problem. I whack this when it pops up over here. Potentially, yeah. And recently, along with colleagues at AgNext, we put out a report just 2 years ago, I think, that called out this very question. There are lots of candidate BMPs out there, nitrogen, carbon, phosphorus, whole bunch of them. And they all have unintended consequences, some of which we know, some of which we don't. Some of which we've quantified, some of which we know exist but haven't quantified. So the answer is it's very possible that things that we do to suppress carbon will become problematic for nitrogen. It's also possible that things that we do for carbon might improve things for nitrogen. But there are so many candidates, those interactions, it's almost as complicated as odor science, which is really, really complicated. Anything else on questions?
Yeah, I got.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I have another one.
Great. Yeah.
And I hear sprinkler usage and open feedlots and stuff as maybe a potential to help with a problem that we're seeing with emissions. And I'll ask my question with an example because a lot of times society, if you're not educated on a certain topic, you're not driven by facts. And so you're driven by headlines or by emotions or whatever. Coming from the oil and gas world for the last 7 or 8 years, people don't care that less than 0.25% of water usage is used in oil and gas operations. They don't care about that. They see millions of gallons going to frack a well. Relating that to this, the whack-a-mole question is we're utilizing potential water source when agriculture already uses 85+% of water in the state of Colorado. Public perception. What's your opinion? This is
All right,
an opinion question. What's your opinion?
I don't have to go to opinion. We can go to some research that we've done.
Okay.
Well, I'll stay back here so just pick up on the microphone. I'm sorry, Jim, at all. Several years back, we did a study, and it has since been published. This is early 2000s, I think we published it. Cattle feed yards that used sprinkler systems for dust control versus those that don't. What is the relative water use? And roughly on an annualized basis, you'd effectively double the amount of water that the feedlot consumes by using a sprinkler system. I did a detailed daily analysis on a feed yard in eastern Washington state. Now, different environment, yes, but semi-arid, irrigated agriculture around there and so forth. And it showed, of course, that your greatest amount of water requirement for dust control would be around July 8th. No surprise there. And it looks like this through the summer season, and then you winterize the thing and you turn it off completely. Overall, the net result of that was to roughly, again, to double the amount of water used. Now, that's compared to a feed yard that does not use water in a sprinkler system. Okay, you can think of 10 to 15 gallons per head per day water consumption for the animals, the drinking water, and then double that roughly for now. Putting that in the context of irrigated agriculture itself, livestock themselves, direct water consumption is a small fraction of total agricultural water use. There's a whole bunch, sorry. But your point stands. This water can be very high quality, and in the publication where I and my co-authors address the sprinkler systems for dust control, we routinely raise this question: is this the highest and best use when there are other ways of achieving dust control as well? And we're on record with those: manure harvesting, good quality pen grooming, and a variety of things. And we publish on that as well. But your point about using drinking quality groundwater for dust control in the Texas Panhandle, we're already seeing we've been seeing our aquifer do this for a long time, and municipals are going to outbid agriculture for the quality of that water, and industry will. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Justin.
Just give you some background on how we got this right. We have a gamut of BMPs that have been thrown out through a literature review of showing any possible effectiveness. So the way bin sprinkling kind of came up wasn't that, hey, here's a novel idea to do. We sat down and said, what are things that facilities in the focus area, well, Leonard counties are already doing. And bin sprinkling was interesting because there were some studies that showed beneficial, some studies showed it negative. And we said, okay, are there changes that we can make in our management practices? Based on an early warning, maybe that day you don't bin sprinkle, it's a negative. You've got to do it because of dust control. But can we change our practices based on what the data is showing? And that got brought up, researched. We certainly don't want to advocate for more water usage. It was one of the tools in the toolbox that we thought as producing opportunity just to either to help or to stop it.
Yeah. I think real important to me is to avoid spending money on things that aren't going to work very well, so that you can save that money to things that are. Good.
Julie over here. Clarify maybe a minute. What I was getting at was the public doesn't care that oil and gas water usage is only less than a quarter % of the water in Colorado. Public perception does not care about that. If I'm if I'm somewhere in an urban center, or if I'm in a state or whatever, and I'm concerned about water usage in general, if I'm driving past a feedlot and I see sprinklers going, I have no clue what it's for at one of your feedlots, and I know what it's for. But you get certain people in the public perception. And so we're trying to
mitigate an issue that we've talked about all morning by using a BMP of sprinkling. Public perception is my concern because it's what it is, right?
You're very right. It is that. My question, and I don't know the answer, Justin, so you can tell me, you're actually using groundwater to sprinkle, or are you using recycled water, which to me, I would use, because I pull recycled water back into flush barns. What's the rationale of using potable water versus recycled water?
Well, depending on the facility. We use some of both, depending on the facility. As Dr. Arlen said, retrofitting systems is very hard to do. And we literally have some of our systems, a guy goes out there and opens the nozzle. And you don't really want to be opening the nozzle under recycled water. So we're all about trying to be as most efficient with that water, put it to its highest value. And that's the struggle. And I'll get a little philosophical here with this whole issue that I think we have to have is what is the best societal benefit? What are we willing to do? Some of this discussion may come down to today of what's the best use of our water? What's ultimately the best thing in the park situation, right? We want to get to 1.5. We don't want to hurt Rocky Mountain National Park. But if that means running agriculture out of the state or out of northeastern Colorado, is that a societal decision we want to make? And that's way too big for this group today. But that's really kind of what it comes down to. And the dust controls. We have facilities that don't have dust control other than fin scraping. We have facilities that do have fin scraping. Our preference would not to be using any water at all, but we have other societal things like neighbors next door, large metropolitan areas that have grown out to our facilities that once were in the country that you now have to deal with that. So it's pulling your hand back from the hand that's trying to bite you first. Maybe the best way to say it. So to answer your question, we use both. It just depends on the situation and what the system.
Would that impact the problem using recycled water? But that is going to impact that flux.
Yeah. I'd like to address that because what I'm. All right, so the question is, what is the expected effect of using some kind of recycled wastewater in a sprinkler system for ammonia control? I think it's going to do the opposite of what we hope. I'm fairly certain. I'm not going to write home tomorrow and offer to commit harakiri if I'm wrong, but I expect that what we will be doing is putting out onto the feed yard surface where there is already plenty of urease enzyme present. We're going to be putting stuff out there that's already high in organic nitrogen and making it quickly available to go off as ammonia. And a plan in the research, in the follow-on research, that the proposal for which will be submitted tomorrow. We have the capability at our Bushland experimental feedlot. We have a solid set sprinkler system on it for precisely these kinds of studies. And we'll have the capacity to fresh water and to blend it with water from the runoff holding pump, which now has water in it, thank God, for the first time in years. But look, I'm telling you what I expect. I think the science clearly supports that, but it supports it in principle, not in empirical facts. And I want the empirical facts to be able to come back to you and say, 2 years from now, we've done the work and it shows what I think it will show.
Just looking at land application, we put this water out on farm fields fertilizer. That fresh water, does it reduce the impact? And that would also somewhat apply to fin sprinkling. So
these are just cans of worms, right? We pull one out and then there's another one that pops up. But I mean, that's the challenge with this. And that's why we want to do this research as producers, is because the last thing we want to do is tell somebody, go implement this BMP based on a literature review that was done 20 years ago. Or a literature review that's done on research 20 years ago on something maybe totally different now. So hope that answers why we got to this, trying to validate something we're doing. And if it is detrimental, well, the good part of that is we can shut those systems off when there's an upslope event, you know, so.
And the other thing is we're always trying to, as animal ag, we're trying to balance a water need. As animal agriculture, we're trying to balance a water need, a water usage requirement, or a stormwater event and air emissions. So sometimes what's good for the water is not good for air. And so we've got to find that correct balance.
It's really that's just like Robert was saying it is. Water is even more expensive. The last thing you want to talk.
All right, thanks everybody. We're a little long on this segment, but this goes to show, I think, exactly, come on up. This just goes to show how much information we have as a group and how many questions there are. So be thinking about, you know, future topics, future ways we can structure conversations to drill into some of these difficult to solve problems. And here's one more.
Okay, yeah. And we'll puzzle over some deposition and weather data here regarding the early warning system. So I'm going to kind of, I know there's some new folks here. I did not provide a background of the early warning system, but if you have specific questions, just let me know. I mean, and others here in the room can speak to that as well. So I'll come back to other, like looking ahead to the future at the end, but I guess the update over the last year or so is that the CLA continued to fund the system over the last year. We were able to get an aging computer system out and a faster one in. So we're running the models out longer now, and we get the data earlier, so it makes it a little bit easier to get those warnings out. So thanks to CLA for that support. It's making things a little bit quicker. Okay, so here we saw, I think Jim had the map earlier that went through maybe 2022 or 23. Here's through the last warning last week or a couple weeks ago. The total number of warnings issued over the history of the system. So as you know, as we're kind of used to, it's Larimer Weld are always going to be in the warnings if there's one issued, and usually Boulder, and then depending on the weather system, sometimes it stretches out further to the east. Pretty unusual to issue the warnings for like those, you know, Crowley County or way down to the southeast, because it's just not that common to get air flowing from that direction. I mean, it happens, but not as common as the counties that are much closer to the park. Here was last year, 2024. So 10 warnings in total, and then, you know, fewer as you get further out away. That's kind of been the goal over time, is like roughly 10, which seems to be a decent sweet spot of like not warning all the time, but still, you know, getting a message out there when it happens. So far this year, 4. So that's kind of where we're, you know, we've got the May still to come, and then the summer, of course. I would imagine we'll probably have a warning come out for the storm coming in next week. But once we get a little bit closer, we'll take a closer look at that. So I guess keep an eye out for the big storm system coming in early next week. Should be very good news for rainfall and drought. But it's also the time of year that we get the transport and the deposition as well.
Sorry to interrupt. For the people online, there's no screen share.
Oh. Thanks, Brian. Okay, I'm gonna put it back into slideshow mode here and hopefully that. Oops, did I? Uh-oh, okay. Okay. Does it still look okay online, or are you seeing like the
No, that
presenter mode?
works.
This is okay?
Yes.
Cool. Okay. So here's this is just the number of warnings per year. This is Weld County, but Weld County is always in the warnings, and Larimer. So you can see what the combination of the weather patterns plus the like COVID years when the things were not as active with the system. Big number of warnings in 2023, which was wet, and we've talked about that before. It turned out that it was not as high for deposition as you might have expected for how much precipitation there was. But again, last year 10 warnings, 4 so far this year. We'll see where that ends up. But over the long run, we kind of end up in that 10-ish per year most of the time. Okay, so now we can look at some of the deposition data. So how we've been working on this lately is just using threshold of, I mean, we could adjust this as needed, but like calling the 90th percentile of weeks, so the top 10% of deposition weeks as sort of the deposition events that we might be trying to address. And so this is for Lock Vale, and so the left side is how many of those there were in each year. And then the right side, which is maybe more interesting to look at, is when they happen during the year. So a big peak in April and May, and then a big drop in June for reasons I don't totally understand. And then it comes back up in July, August, and September to an extent. So April, May, and then July, August are the big months for deposition for these big weeks at Lock Vale. And then once in a while in the winter, but not nearly as common. Here's the same thing for Beaver Meadows. So recall this site is slightly lower elevation up to the northeast of where Lock Vale is. And the monthly patterns are pretty similar. Again, April, May, July, August are the big months. Dip in June, but not as big of a dip. Almost never in the winter at Beaver Meadows. But the reason for showing this is that which weeks are events at the two stations is not always is rarely the same, which makes this whole problem very challenging. And that's what I'll show next here. So just kind of to take stock of how we're doing, I think, with the warning system overall. The good news is that we're really good at forecasting the upslope events that produce a lot of precipitation and deposition at Beaver Meadows. So every high deposition event in the last 2 years had an early warning at Beaver Meadows, 4 out of 6 in 2022. So we're doing quite well there. There's, we still have, especially in 2023, there were a bunch of false alarms. But I think overall the performance, like what we know and what we can model for upslope to this location is quite good. So this is a metric of basically just think of this as the forecast skill. It's a metric called threat score. Higher score is better. 1 would be, you're perfectly predicting every single event. So here, like at Beaver Meadows, and again, like 2020 was the COVID, like we weren't really doing this very much in that year. But overall, like this, so the score over the last few years averages maybe 0.3, 0.4 at Beaver Meadows, which is generally pretty good for this. And most of the issues are just with issuing warnings in weeks where it doesn't end up being high deposition. Not too many misses at Beaver Meadows. The problem is what we actually care about is Lock Vale at the higher elevations, and what we are good at doing for Beaver Meadows does not translate really to Lock Vale. So we only had six of the last 10 events at Lock Vale had warnings, lots of false alarms, or we got the forecast. Basically, there was high deposition at Beaver Meadows, but not Lock Vale. So there's like the forecast skill for Lock Vale. If we go back, like this is on the same scale. So quite good at Beaver Meadows, not so good at Lock Vale. So question is, what is going on here? And so that there's a few hints, at least, at this in some preliminary analysis. So one is that, so all right, let me explain the plot here. This is the color shading here. If it's blue, it's the amount of precipitation that happened in weeks that basically was a correct forecast. If it's that like orangish pinkish color, it's where we did not issue a warning, but there was high deposition. If it's the greenish color, then it was a false alarm. We issued a warning, but it did not have high deposition. So basically you see this big spike at the left side, which is those are weeks where we issued a warning, but it ended up having, less than an inch or less than a half inch of precipitation at Lock Vale. So there's a lot that fall in that bin where just the precipitation forecast wasn't very good. So that's certainly a piece of it, and I'll show some maps in a second on that. But that's not all of it. There are some weeks where Lock Vale had 2-3+ inches of precipitation, but very low deposition, where we issued warnings for those periods, and then they didn't pan out. So that's one complication here. So what I'm going to show now is some maps of precipitation. This is now from like a more complete precipitation data set, over the region, for the weeks, basically aligning with the 7-day periods that the NADP data gets collected. So this is 12 cases that we had correct forecasts at Lock Vale. And maybe it's hard to see the color scale there, but basically if you're in that like brighter blue color, it was at least an inch of precipitation. The real bright blue, like the cyan, is an inch and a half. So this is averaged over those 12 cases. We probably should break this down like by season, but haven't gotten to that yet. So the cases we get right, there's heavy precipitation everywhere, and the most precipitation is like right over that part in the park, where like the southwest corner of the park, the high elevations, and the little circle there is roughly the location of Lock Vale. So the events that have lots of precipitation everywhere, those seem to be ones that we forecast pretty well. These are the ones we missed. So these are the ones that we did not issue a warning, but there ended up being high deposition. The main pattern here is actually not very much precipitation on the plains, but high, like that stripe coming down the high elevations of the Front Range there. So that's maybe something. And then these are the ones where we had false alarms, where we issued warnings. This is a much bigger number of cases where we issued warnings that ended up not having high deposition. So the comparison here is mainly on the Eastern Plains. Like the pattern over the mountains is basically the same. The amount of precipitation over the mountains is pretty much the same, but there's a lot more precipitation on the plains in these cases where we issued warnings. So I think this is at least giving us a hint of what was mentioned earlier, right? Is that some of these cases where there's heavy precipitation on the Eastern Plains, probably a lot of that, the emissions may be similar, but it's getting washed out before it makes its way up to the park. So this maybe is a hint that we should not be so quick to issue warnings on those cases. Of course, it's never this simple. So here are two cases, 2 other weeks of just the precipitation maps like we were just looking at. These are specific weeks. So the one on the left, you can see the pattern. Lock Vale had 1.3 inches in that period. The one on the right, the actual, the NADP site had 1.68 inches. Our hypothesis from a minute ago would suggest that maybe the one on the right would be the one that we would especially want to warn on, because there was not that much precipitation on the plains, but a lot in the mountains. But in this case, it was the one on the left had much higher deposition. So obviously precipitation data is only one piece of the puzzle here. But it's not as simple as, oh, if it's raining a lot on the plains, then it's not going to have high deposition. So it's, yeah. Well, that's, yes, I mean, absolutely. So that's a piece of it also is so the question was, does it matter when it rains on the plains? And yeah, exactly. If the upslope flow is causing precipitation everywhere, then like before the air makes it up to the park, then that's more likely to remove the nitrogen than if it's all gets to the park and then it rains later on the plains. So yeah, exactly.
Sure, but I think even building on what Dr. Armstrong was talking about earlier, if it rains before you get that flow up to the park, you may have some suppression as well.
Exactly.
So the timing, I think, not just how much did it rain over a set of days, but when did it happen in that set of days? I think.
Yep, agree. And we try to take that into account. I mean, and you can kind of see it in the model, like the plots we look at every day for the forecast, but that's the part that often the models don't quite get those details right either, in terms of like when the storms over Greeley are going to happen versus when the heavy rain or snow happens up in the park.
Russ, I appreciate this extra data very much. I think I ask this question every time, but the default assumption is that a high deposition event always was the result of upslope from northeastern Colorado. So I don't know how we parse out the weeks we missed. Was it because there was a true upslope from Colorado versus is it at all possible that there's ever a high deposition event that didn't originate over northeast Colorado?
Yes. So you've led to my next example here, which is exactly what Bonnie just asked. So these precipitation maps are zoomed out to the whole state now. I didn't have all the data processed I just didn't get the zoomed in maps made for these. So these are 2 consecutive weeks last year. So the last week of April on the left, the first week of May on the right, from 2024, basically exactly a year ago. So in the left case, you can see this was a big, some places got a lot of snow in this event up in the mountains, or it was rain lower down, but a lot of precipitation up in the park, like 2-3 inches up in the park. And so that was heavy precipitation, and there was high deposition in that case. The one on the right, the week after, was the deposition was about twice as high in that week, with about half the precipitation. And it was especially the nitrates that were high in that, like the ammonia deposition was about the same between the 2 weeks, but the nitrate was like twice as high in the second week there, with maybe, so it was like that was like 1.5 inches or so of precipitation at Lockvale, and then in the week before had like 3 inches. So this, and then if we did not issue it, we issued a warning for the one on the left, but not for the one on the right. And just kind of looking back at what happened in that second week was, I think the source was somewhere else. Like if you look at the flow was not coming from eastern Colorado. So like maybe we were right to not issue a warning because it would not, like eastern Colorado was not the source region. And I asked Jeff Collett a little bit. I was like, what would drive the nitrates to be particularly high? I mean, we speculated on some things. I mean, if the transport was, I mean, it's possible that like that'd be oil and gas, but it could also be oil and gas from Wyoming or Idaho or something coming in, or something else. I'm not totally sure. So that one's kind of a puzzlement. Like again, like if we tally up the numbers, we sort of maybe we missed that one, but maybe it was just not a. And I think a lot of the wintertime ones at Lockvale, it's not that common to have strong upslope flow in the middle, like in January up to the very high elevations. Usually that is coming in from the west in some way also. So we don't usually issue warnings on those, partly because of that, and in general, the high deposition doesn't happen as often in the winter, but it can. Okay, so this is sort of where we're at. So the puzzlement of the trying to parse through all this data, and speaks to the discussion earlier about, we can always use more data. right? Okay, so then looking forward, just with the project as a whole, like that the CLA funding from the last year ended in February, and I guess this is the discussion for here today. Like, do we want to keep this going, and how, and of what interest? I mean, I think no matter what, we'll keep the models are running. That's all set up. The automated pieces are not that complicated to keep going. So like unfunded, we can keep doing that part, but probably not this sort of stuff we're talking about here today. The status quo, like CLA's funded it in the, in the ballpark of 10K, which I think is just fine to keep things going status quo if that is of interest, or from some other source. Or as always, we could think bigger of what a bigger project would look like, and what the interest in that would be potentially. So that's maybe some points for discussion depending on how much time we have. So I guess I'll just leave that up there, but to open more cans of worms here. Stuff today, it seems.
Any questions?
Or everybody's getting hungry.
So what is it, the $10,000, what time horizon? That gets you through a year?
Yeah. I think it was somewhere between like 7,500. Or it was actually more than that. We need to get the computing system. We don't need to do that every year. So it's only just like for some of my time and our other little bit of staff time, basically. We can obviously negotiate details and all that. We don't need to do that here with the bigger group, but
Jim online has a question.
that's right. Yeah,
Just,
for the last, the CLA has been kind of the only funder really for the last, I don't know, going back to, I guess, like before, since Brock passed away, really, like that was I think the last time there was funding, like maybe from USDA, and maybe there was an EPA project, but again, that was like 10 years ago.
Yeah, and quickly, I don't know if hope you can still hear me. That just hoping that there's agreement to keep this going. There was, and just connecting dots. Bonnie, I know you're in a different position now, but there was the kind of the vision of leveraging this in the future to collect data on aggregate data on BMPs, like all BMPs. So that makes it potentially more value if that is still envisioned.
Jim, I guess, speak to some of the aggregate data collection through this process. The early warning system is kind of two pieces. It's the warnings that are issued and the climatology and prediction that CSU and Dr. Schumacher do. And then it is a website that is hosted by the Colorado Livestock Association that when his team issues a warning, it goes out to producers who are signed up either via email or via text message. They say to themselves, can I implement BMPs? And when they ask that question, what they're saying is, can I do this without negatively impacting what's best for my animals that I'm in care of? Because our first duty is always to take the best care of those animals we can. Sometimes we can, sometimes we can't. If it happens to be an early spring blizzard that's predicted, we may have other things we need to be taking care of to beat up our animals. Most of the time producers can. So they get a warning, they ask that question, what can I do as far as BMPs that can be implemented? And then they implement those. And if they don't, that's fine as well. I mean, they have to make that decision, but then they log onto this website that CLA hosts that they then record, did I make a change? And if so, what was it? If I didn't make a change, why not? That's the data collection you're talking about, Jim, or I think you're talking about. I don't want to put words in your mouth. That service has actually been always funded by CLA as well and hosted by a web provider in Texas. He actually reached out to CLA this last year and said, hey, my business is kind of went in a different direction. I don't want to do this anymore. So CLA has contracted with another provider. We've gotten all of the source code for that, transferred it over. Nothing is going to stop running it will continue to gather that data. But in that process, we're looking at how are there tweaks that we can make to get better reports out of that, to make it easier to look at what is the adoption rate by producers, what BMPs are being used, what aren't, and really see then if we can use that information to inform us to how to reach out to members of the association and producers in general to increase adoption rate. So this 10K a year is just for the weather prediction and issuance of the warnings. And then there's honestly about another 10K a year that's the cost of maintaining the other side of the system. And that is already taken care of. Does that answer your question, Jim?
Partly, and thank you for all those reminders. And if I'm hearing like potential commitment to keep it going as is, what I was doing is just reminding us of a previous idea of, well, there is a struggle to collect to get information on those on like BMPs that are all year round, and so the idea was to maybe leverage the venue that you were talking about for reporting on that, maybe in lieu of the more labor intensive effort of all the surveys. So that's what I was mentioning is potentially building upon this to address that issue. But deference to you, Bonnie, and others to that end.
That's new, so let me think about that a little bit. But I kind of like the idea initially.
Sure.
If that's a platform producers are already using, is there a way to get them to engage to include that information? So let us kind of think through that and talk with I'm not an IT person, but the dude that's handling the website and figure out how we can, we may potentially be able to tie that in and use that to replace our survey data.
That sounds great. If you think there's any potential in it, it could be a win-win for us.
And thanks for that update too, Justin, because I was going to ask about that, the status of because I knew there was some stuff happening with the web. So glad to hear that part is sorted out.
I can't speak for CLA, but I am on the board and
I can't speak for CLA and their checkbook, but I'm on the board and I'm willing to take this before our board to talk about us carrying this at least for another year on our own.
Sure. Thanks.
Thank you.
maybe just cooperative with ag or something.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Appreciate that. It's flexible. We're not gonna like turn things off next week or something. So yeah. I don't know. End of June. I can make up a date. I don't know when your board meetings are. Okay, great. If it has to be longer, it's fine too. Yeah. That's not my wheelhouse. And obviously it's not the time to be asking the federal government for support, it sounds like, either. or the state. Yeah. I mean, I have plenty of ideas. If we want to talk bigger ideas, I've got plenty of ideas, but I realize it's probably not the time for that. So Sure. No, yeah. I see. Okay.
I would like to think about potentially
When did you send your
what some of these things are costing us.
this one
That's really hard to do.
at 9:51 today? Okay.
Are we
I'm gonna offer a break just because it's nice. Before before we keep moving, everybody's been comfortable moving in and out. If you need to use the restroom or anything, are you okay to continue? We have a lot of material. It's been really good today. I love all this. So let's just push forward. We do have lunch coming at 12:30-ish. But we can continue this dialogue over lunch. There's been a lot of open questions that maybe we want to circle around. But let's get going here. Thanks, Bonnie.
Nope, it's gone. This one. Okay. Folks in the room, so just a little bit about where my participation in this, where I've been, where I'm at now. I have started working for the Environmental Ag Program at the State Health Department back in 2013, and we regulate animal feeding operations. So all those dots that Jeff Collette showed on the map are all subject to our regulations. Did that for almost 9 years, and then left and worked for industry for a little while. So was a CLA member, and then my participation in this group started off at the Ag Program more as a listening role, just kind of keeping the Ag Program tapped in to what this group is doing. Our previous manager, Phyllis Woodford, was very instrumental in getting this group off the ground. So our program's always been involved in this process. And then on the industry side, here's a CLA representative, got much more involved in the BNP work group, and I'll get into some of the history there. I am now back at the Ag Program in a slightly different role. They were able to open up a work group lead there, so I have a little bit of oversight of some of our employees, and a big part of my reason for coming back is the 3 guys that work there have been there for 10 plus years. They're all getting close to retirement. I'd like to be able to also make sure that program continues to run in the future. So it's a good opportunity for me, but I also really appreciate working on the industry side. I think I should be able to participate at the same level. I think I should be able to act kind of as a technical liaison, participating in the BNP work groups, but some of it will change. So I can't answer questions about what CLA is doing. But I think I can still would like to stay involved as long as everyone in this group is comfortable with it. If anything changes, I have to go back, talk to my bosses about it, but I think I should be able to participate at a similar level. So that's me. Real quick overview of kind of what's happened in recent history. And this is going to sound familiar because we touched on a lot of this. But in 2018, we developed a focus area of Morgan and Weld County based on proximity to the park, frequency of those upslope events, and concentration of animal production. From that came a BMP list. We've got this working list of BMPs. In 2019, CLA funded a study in the focus area to go out to feedlots, dairies, and crop producers to see which of these practices they're implementing. In 2020, we applied, well, not we, I mean, CLA and applied for, well, whoever did, applied for the NRCS EQIP grant that Dr. Overman spoke to. So this group has been involved in assessing those BMPs, looking for ones that need more research, finding dollars for those research, that kind of thing. And then in 2022, started building a dynamic kind of BMP inventory to try to get our arms around what the BMPs are, which ones are most effective, which ones need research. The industry funded literature review kind of on all of those different BMPs. The BMP work group is working on kind of refining that, going through it, looking for the most effective BMPs, potentially removing ineffective BMPs, looking for ones that show promise but need additional research dollars, as we've done in the past with those conservation innovation grants. Look for new BMPs and then use it to inform future surveying events. Kind of the things that are in progress is reaching out to dairy and poultry partners, and we've got Bill Skebby here, so we're really working all the channels we can to get folks more involved, and we've got a lot of new faces here today, which is great. Looking at the BMP inventory, having folks from each sector really critically look at those BMPs, and then exploring upgrades to the early warning system. In general, after everything is all said and done, this inventory includes 37 year-round practices And then there's 12 practices that can be implemented specifically during those early warning periods. It kind of falls into general categories of either animal production, crop production, and then of course the things that you can do during the early warning system. So just real quick, when it comes to nitrogen flow through livestock production, you start off with your nitrogen in your feed. That all gets, well, not all, portion of it gets converted to meat, milk, and eggs. And once it's excreted, some amount of it is retained in manure, but a lot of it is just lost. Ammonia is lost to the atmosphere based on physical and chemical reactions. It's really hard. Once that manure hits that pen surface and mixes with urine, a lot of that ammonia is lost just based on chemistry. But a certain amount is retained in the manure. And then a lot of that manure, and when I say manure, I mean what's on the pen surface. I also mean what's maybe washed into your ponds, what's in your wastewater. That, for the most part, gets land applied. Not always to crops that are fed to animals. A lot of it's made into compost, going to gardens, that kind of thing. But a lot of it does go back into nitrogen for feed. And that's another point where you can have nitrogen loss to the atmosphere. And well, specifically ammonia. So when it comes to best management practices to reduce ammonia emissions, the best place to start is with your feed. If you're feeding less nitrogen, there's less nitrogen to be excreted. Dr. Overman touched on this. It's kind of you get improvements to a certain point, and then if you take it too far, you're going to make ammonia emissions worse. And I think one of the things to keep in mind is just how complex ammonia is versus regulating a tailpipe versus, putting a control on, on energy production. It's very different. It's a living system, but you start off by decreasing your nitrogen in your feed through dietary formulation and precision. And then the next best thing you can do is make sure that you convert as much of that nitrogen as possible into meat, milk, eggs, fiber through genetic selection, animal health, and production technologies. And then from there are some practices you can use to help retain more of that nitrogen in the manure. And then as you land apply it, there are making sure you're applying it at the right time, right rate, to make sure that the most of that, as much as you can, of that nitrogen is going into crop production. The two biggest bang for your buck practices fall into dietary formulation and precision and production technologies. And that is what the literature review showed the industry had done, is that those are by far the most effective. I would say as you're moving through this chain, it's a law of diminishing returns. So it gets harder and harder and harder, and there's less and less and less nitrogen to retain. Go ahead, Justin. Yeah, correct. These are the dietary formulation and production technologies. These are your year-round practices, day in, day out. You can't change that overnight. It's not a switch you can flip. It is a year-round practice. Not captured in the early warning. Yes. Yep. And so to tie that to the implementation survey that was done in 2019, in this focus area, the great news is the most effective BMPs are being implemented at a very high rate at feedlots and dairies when it comes to the production technologies like implants, beta agonists, things like Rumensin, working with a nutritionist to formulate and balance your rations, balancing them to maximize conversions, formulating them based on your feed ingredients. For the dairy side, there's kind of this novel tool you can use where you look at your milk urea nitrogen numbers, and John Slutsky presented on that to this group several years back. But you can monitor that milk urea nitrogen, and it can really tell you if you're overfeeding nitrogen. If those numbers get too high, you're feeding too much, and they can adjust for that. And it's I think, a very cool tool that they have in their tool belt to know when they're feeding too much. And then when it comes to phase feeding, so you're feeding more protein when cattle are younger, and you kind of decrease that as they grow, only applies to the feedlots. But some of these incredibly effective technologies have been, will be, are being used at most facilities. And I get that the question is always then, how come that needle's not moving up at Rocky Mountain National Park? And one of the things that I attempted to do, this is probably wrong, and I'm sure there's plenty of people in the room that will tell me of my fallacies, but there are a lot of source apportionment studies. None of them really narrow it down to ag in Colorado. And then ag in the focus area, or kind of generally the central Front Range kind of expanded focus area. So I did my best looking at all the source apportionment studies and what the NEI says to break that down, because yes, it's true that ag is 70% of the ammonia emissions in the Denver Metro North Front Range 9-county area. What does that look like as you kind of pare it down? Because Colorado's only half, ammonia is only 60%. And at least my crude estimate is that, you know, when it comes down to it, fertilizer is a pretty small piece of the pie in the Central Front Range. Livestock is, you know, is a big piece, but then we've also got the wet ammonia deposition from everything else in Colorado and from out of state, and our NOx component. So all of, you know, if this is anywhere near the ballpark, you know, all of the Central Front Range in ag is about 21% of deposition during an average year. That drops by about 4 or 5% in a year with high wildfires. It is all based on NEI data. I have a slide at the end. If you guys want to know how I did this, it's all right there. I'm more than happy to give that to you guys so you can shred it. But, and I say that to say that this, to try to put it in perspective, that if we were even to remove all of that ag from Colorado in the Central Front Range, you know, when we look at the 2023 deposition, that was about 2.2, we're still going to need a 30% reduction to ever get to that 1.5. Wipe all of ag off the map and we're maybe there. So I'm just trying to put in perspective and to also ask the question of this group that was brought up with, you know, the looking at the nitrogen deposition reduction plan. What can you expect if we reduce ammonia emissions by 25% in this piece of pie? What will that look like? I think this also maybe kind of helps put in perspective when it comes to BMPs and where we want to invest our time and energy and efforts. When it comes to crop production, that is the most difficult arena to operate in. It is tens of thousands of family farms that are all being operated differently, very different production systems, dry land, irrigated, different crops. It's very difficult to move the needle there. And I will say, I mean, I think it's going to take everything. I think every drop counts. I don't want to discount a single solitary thing. It's just more about directing this group's effort. And I think, again, it's just trying to ask that question of what do we expect to see? And then in the broader picture, at what point will we say this group has done enough? We need to look at other sources. Because this group's been here for a long time, has been doing these surveys, has been showing this data, has been investing research dollars into new BMPs. And yet, still massive ask that we do more and more and more. And I know there's room for improvement. And I think this group is very committed to continuing that and to continuing to use the early warning system and leveraging that. And then just, I know we've all seen the deposition graphs, and Justin touched on this a little bit, but it's not all, I see it as not all doom and gloom. Since this whole project started, we've had a lot of years that are at or below that glide path, that are within about 5%. That seems like a pretty good success story to me. I know the rolling 5-year average doesn't show that. And like Justin mentioned, Jill Barron has said that you accumulate nitrogen in low years, but you flush it out in average and high years. What does that mean? I don't know that that was thought of or incorporated in when this whole process started and these goals were developed. And so I hope that is also part of it is, yes, there's this 1.5 goal, but how do we also account for different years, variation, that type of thing? So this is, like I said, the slide that kind of shows my breakdown. So questions, comments, feedback. I think it is a question of where we go, you know, from here, and we'll continue to have the BMP meetings. And I mean, I think we're still committed to looking for new BMPs, investing research dollars, and continuing to prove up that those implementation rates, and maybe the early warning system can be a vehicle for that.
The table that Bonnie showed with percentage adoption by BMP, it was in the 80s and 90s. That's what I meant when I say it's all, these practices are already baked in because there's a financial incentive to do so. So we've come, well, right on, that's all I'm saying.
Right on.
And now, you know, caveat it, it's in the focus area.
the proposals that we asked, but I think it's a very representative group in terms of the industry in general.
I don't know, Dr. Arnold's point, it is already baked in, but there are continuing to be improvements. I mean, you know, beta agonists have come on the stage in the last half a dozen years, maybe my memory's getting wrong when they came about, but they've really gotten big the last half dozen, probably more like 10 years, 10 or 12 years. But that's something that's relatively new, that's had a big impact on efficiencies in the industry. And so while these are baked in, the industry has never stopped looking. And I can speak to farmers, I can speak to ranchers, I can speak to feed yards, dairies, pork. Margins are small and a lot of years are negative. So we are constantly looking for efficiencies. And when there is one, we're extremely quick to adopt. Well, we're extremely quick to test it. And once it's confirmed, we're very quick to adopt. So they are baked in, but we're still looking and working to find those efficiencies. So just didn't want that to be lost, that it's been here forever. There are still improvements.
Jim online has a question.
Yeah, just quickly, thank you. And Bonnie, a great presentation. Thank you. And I'll just say, you know, whether it's with industry or the state, you've been a star for us for this project. So I appreciate your ongoing efforts, and it's great to hear that you can, you know, stay the course, if I understand, to the degree possible, and appreciate your program support. I think whether it's chat or another to provide your time and Brian's time for facilitation. I guess in terms of like what's expected, you know, that I think the most or a main thing that you know, there's a lot of uncertainty connecting, you know, the emissions and deposition, right? So the best practices, optimizing those, again, referring back to that term and standard to be defined, is the main thing that we should be looking at in terms of holding, you know, agriculture accountable, if you will, through the data from the surveys, or even the more sort of cloud-based automated system that maybe the early warning system webpage. That's why I bring up those things, trying to connect the dots to make it easier for ag to tell their stories and to demonstrate that they're doing their part for the project, reflecting on optimization of BMPs. No question there, really. It's just observation.
Well, the time to that, Jim, you brought up several years ago alternative measurements of how we know we've gotten there, of our performance, other than just the glide path and that 1.5. And, you know, I've heard some things today that are very refreshing to hear, you know, just the comment of, we don't expect to get to 1.5 on ag alone or in Colorado. And that doesn't mean we're taking our eyes off of it, but the realization that this is going to have to go more broad than where we're focusing now. But I think defining how we know when we've gotten to where we're headed to, or where we want to be, is important. Because right now it doesn't feel like we have an end goal other than 1.5. And so how do we know when agriculture has done their part, and not that we're just going to walk away and forget about it, but, you know, is it 90% adoption rate? Is it 80%? Is that even the metric we're going to measure? But I think that's something we need to talk about as we have our June meeting, and we're looking at redoing all of this, is how do we know when we've got there? Because we've been on this road a long time. And for those of you that have been here the whole time, it's been a long trip, and it'd be nice to be done with the trip at some point. So it'd be nice to know where we're headed and what we're shooting for as better goal.
Agreed.
And so is this enough to say that we've achieved some amount of success, or does it not count because it was just in the focus area and it was just a handful of facilities? Or I don't know. I mean, does this show any success to folks?
I mean,
Thank you. That is true. It is the vast majority of the folks in those focus areas.
And I guess to answer your question, I didn't hear exactly in the room there, but we do, as reflected in the milestone report, is of this relatively high rate of BMPs. Just looking at the date here, 2019, it's at least once every milestone period, it would be great to have refreshed data, whether it's through specific knock on the door mailed surveys or the or more automated system.
Well, maybe we could also commit to refreshing the Roman study and all of that, the source apportionment. I mean, I don't think we're the only ones that rely on data that's a few years out. I'm sorry, that's probably not fair to say, but yes, I understand that that we need to continue to demonstrate that these industry-wide practices continue to be used. Even though there's financial reasons to use them, there's lots of other motivations. And what I'm hearing is the MOU agencies need a number that gets updated frequently to continue demonstrating that these practices that are common continue to be implemented. Is that fair?
I think so, and what resolution is practical, and that was one of the reasons that we agreed on this on the focus area to do so.
Let us know what you're thinking as far as the resolution, so we know as an industry what we need to target, be it the automated system or be it a mail-out survey. So we know, hey, you want an update every 3 years or whatever it is, or every 5 years or every 15 years. But I mean, I think that's something that the MOUs need to think through as we head into that June meeting.
Right. And just on the fly, ideas are to, have the focus area 3 counties using, because there's arguments to add Morgan, like we've talked about previously, but to have data that represents those 3 counties at least every milestone period, for us to be able to, to report on that. And also, there's more issues. I know we're like behind times, but each one of the the target is not 100% for each BMP within the focus area, because they don't lend themselves for each one doesn't lend itself to every operation. So that needs to be understood as to what optimization means for the individual or even aggregate number of BMPs.
So, Bunny, I think part of what we need to look at is, what are the adoption rates of BMPs, and you've got that up there, and I think that's important to keep track of. And if folks are doing it already, and there's a financial incentive for them to do that, they're going to continue to do it. And so, yeah, maybe every X number of years check in just to make sure we're still around there is good. But then I also think that there's a hard number, right? There's an emission concentration type of number that we've also got to track to, right? That the Park Service and others are tracking that. And how do we show our contribution to that? And I think you've at least got to start on it. So looking at your pie chart, was that pie chart, is that current year, or is that what does that represent?
All right. So we've got 60% of the wet ammonia is of the total deposition is ammonia. And I'm basing that on NADP data or Lock Vale from not the MOU agency's data, because I don't have the ammonia and NOx, so I couldn't do that analysis, but I can do it with the NADP data. So the average percentage of the deposition at Lock Vale, that's what I started with, was 60%. So I'm hoping this is kind of an average year. It wouldn't, I don't know how you get it to change from year to year, but we start there. And then based on the Roman studies and the Thompson paper in 2015, I went with 55% of that wet ammonia deposition is from Colorado. And then based on the Thompson study as well, I took that 75% of that wet nitrogen or wet ammonia from Colorado is from Morgan and Weld, North Front Range, and Central Colorado. It's very hard to merge all of these things because they're all done in different areas. They differentiate it differently. It's very difficult to pull it together, but 75% of it's from that northeastern Colorado area and from the Thompson study. And then I took that 25% of that total wet nitrogen deposition. So that what you end up with is 25% of the total wet ammonia deposition comes from the Colorado Front Range. And I compared that to what was put in the milestone report. And if I recall correctly, the milestone report says that 20% is the lower bound for the Colorado Front Range. So some amount of agreement there. And then went to the NEI studies, and I left out 2021 because it was a high wildfire year. So I didn't include that, and went with 73% of the ammonia emissions in that 9-county area are coming from livestock, and that 12% is coming from fertilizer application. So those were all the different things I tried to merge together. And again, I'm probably doing a calculation wrong. It was just attempting to get at least this conversation started, because I think what we hear a lot is 70% of it's from ag. 70% of 60% of 55% is from ag. So, I'm not here to defend this. I'm just here to present this as for consideration, but that's where it came from. So those are all.
And then so my thought was, okay, so somebody built a glide path. It was before my time here, but somebody built a glide path. We had a starting point. We have a supposed ending point, right? And at that starting point, we had a percent of that we can probably attribute to ag in the Front Range in our target area, right? So if we can figure out what that is, and then on a periodic basis figure out where we're at now, like what is our, we can do that delta and figure out, okay, here's our percent reduction. Here's what we've done as ag over that time. And maybe that's a metric that we can use to say, hey, look, we were, 12% of the problem, we've reduced by X percent, and now we're down to 2% of the problem, and we've done our part or not or more. And that way, that's a number we can put together. I don't know how easy that would be, because it sounds like you put some work into trying to figure out kind of the average number, and trying to find it at two different points in time, maybe even harder, because we have these data points at different time periods that we might not be able to match up. But that's just.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And, there is difficulty with the national emissions inventory because they never apply their methodology updates backwards in time. So even that can't really be used as a trend analysis unless somebody knows how to do all of the very complex. I mean, it takes them several years to do it. But yeah, I like that. I think back about Jeff Collette's presentation, and I do get that he's showing that there's a faster increase in ammonia from these ag areas. And so there's a lot of stuff that's not squaring, because we do know that these systems are getting more and more efficient, still working on trying to present that in a way that everybody accepts and is comfortable with. So why is that still happening? The question I forgot to ask Jeff is, does it have anything to do with temperature? Ammonia is incredibly volatile. It's very, affected by temperature and moisture and all these other things. I don't know if that plays a part in it, but I get that we're trying to square all of these different things. And it's just, I think the fact of the matter is it's ammonia, and it's very difficult for a lot of reasons. And it's a living system, and it does not have a tailpipe. And so, and I think that's what this group has always wrestled with. And I think we get closer and closer to answers, but yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah, more wrestling to come. And we did, as in our presentation, we'd have on our list to work with you further and to try to understand what is achievable just simply by working with agriculture. I appreciate you, Bonnie, your calculations on this. I think still, high level with this is what's important is this group's validation of effective BMPs and understanding implementation levels. To take it further, to understand like what emission reductions and deposition reductions have been achieved by agriculture that would be ideal, but it's going to be challenging to do. Again, optimization, I think is the thing to keep an eye on.
So it sounds like perhaps the next BMP group should just focus strictly on a definition of the word optimization. Which we've gone over this for a decade of what metrics are. So, and metrics have been proposed, and metrics have been discussed, and metrics have been presented. And so, but there's still work left to do. So I think that's perhaps what we need to focus on, is coming up with a definition to present to this group for approval as to what optimization means. If we can get there, because like I said, we've tried. And I do apologize. I will have to run here in a few minutes. I have a hearing I have to go to. So.
Thank you. That makes sense, Bonnie.
We're
You're gonna have a target. You need to define it.
Yeah, so 91% implementation, highly successful, right? What I think everybody struggles with is not being able to quantify the amount of emissions reductions that happen from these BMPs and how that translates then into deposition of the park. So is there a way? Is there a way of quantifying this? Because I think these are great quality measures, right? Can we quantify?
I'll let Dr. Opperman speak to it. He knows a lot more than I did.
I'm not going to presume to answer your question, Christy, but I would like to propose a framework, building on comments that have been made along the way here. Everybody is going to want to have a certain kind of metric. There is a 1.5 that is an example of what Dr. Zvicka was talking about. Is it doctor now? Yeah, okay. No, sorry. I promoted it. Greg. Greg pointed to it a few minutes ago. That's an absolute number that we're shooting for. How close are we getting to that is one form of a metric. Then there's a relative question. How far are we towards that? And are we making progress? And that's another one. And then another one that I would offer, which was embedded in about a decade or so ago, when Dr. Wendy Powers led a group of us with NRCS, including John Slutsky and a few others, for the National Air Quality Site Assessment Tool. I'm going to use the term NACSAT for it just because it flows off the tongue easily. The NACSAT was a self-assessment framework looking at which BMPs are you adopting on a livestock or poultry operation. And the green or red scoring was computed on the basis of percentage of what is achievable in that. So back to the idea that this animal is a living beast that has its own biophysical limitations. If we knew that the biophysical limitations of a beef animal was that you can't get more efficient than, let's say, 45% ammonia emissions without killing the animal, without this effectively rendering the animal not that animal anymore. How close are we getting to that? What is practically achievable? Because holding livestock producers accountable to reduce ammonia emissions below the absolute biophysical de minimis is a fool's errand. Unless, again, you want to drive the livestock industry out of Colorado together. So there is this question of how much is achievable. So there's an absolute, there's a relative progress rate question, and then there's as a percentage of what is achievable. And I think all three of those categories of metrics have their place, and I think we ought to at least consider advancing metrics in all three buckets, in all three categories, because as was pointed out earlier, public wants to see 1.5, right? We're conditioning them to want 1.5. All right, that's an absolute number, but we've got to be able to identify progress in the meantime. And how much of that burden can fall on any particular source is a question of how much is practically achievable within that. So anyway, those three categories, I think, are metrics we could look at.
And I would say, I think we've long tried to get at that. What is the reduction? And I get that you can, like I said, I keep saying you can do it with power plants because it's really easy to say per pound of fuel burned, you emit X amount of NOx. I think maybe it's possible. The reason we can't answer this question, the same way, is because of how complicated these systems are and the fact that it gets presented as this massive conglomerate and it's a factory farm and it's chugging and plugging. Everybody's doing everything exactly the same way. It's not true at all. All of our farmers are family farmers for the most part. All of these facilities are different. Feedlots are different. Dairies are even more different. It depends on the climate. I mean, having seen it on the industry side, they're testing feed every day. They're testing every feed source. They're adjusting on the fly with their nutritionist, but they're also having to adjust for things like when you have winter weather, you might have to change your rations a little bit when you've got a winter storm coming. So you mix it up a little bit, and there you can't necessarily push that nitrogen down. You're worried about animal health, which also helps with production and everything else. And so, and some of them can use implants, some of them can't. Depends on where you're selling to. There's just, I think that we can't, maybe we haven't been able to answer that question because of the complexity of these systems and how different they actually are, and how it can change. And I mean, that would be great. I think that's the ultimate goal. And maybe it's just a very simplified look at it. You look at the literature and you say that these BMPs have seen this range of reduction and it's being implemented at this amount of facilities, and you make a ballpark. I don't know, but I think I would love to answer that question. I just don't know for sure that we can because it is so different. And then what? I mean, I get that that's not helpful for this group, but
yeah, obviously more discussion. But Bonnie, isn't it like on the BMP list, wasn't efficacy an attribute?
It is, Jim, but I will tell you that when we looked at this literature review, it can range from 1 to 37. And sometimes you're looking at, especially when it comes to production technologies,
right?
Looking at a very specific blend of this beta agonist and this implant for this type of animal. But yes, I mean, that's what I'm saying is maybe we just take that range for all of the production technologies. We saw a range of this to this. I don't know, but yes. We're trying to get to an efficacy rate, I guess, still. But, and I know it feels maybe like an excuse, but I do truly believe that part of the reason these questions haven't been answered is because I don't know that it's possible to answer them in the way that folks want them answered because of how complicated everything is. And
sure.
And maybe we need to bring somebody on board who knows how to narrow these things down. I mean, you guys are looking at incredibly complex ecosystems up at the park, and you kind of narrow it down to lichen species and diatoms, and you're not looking at every last little bit and piece of it. So I don't know what that answer is, but.
So one of the things we struggle with state, not many things that we're moving in the direction of regulation. If the production were to move out of Colorado, it probably is not done as well as what Colorado does. And so that production doesn't become zero if it no longer happens in Colorado, oil and gas is the example. And so one of the things that we started looking at more and more as a potential tool in the toolbox is this concept of intensity. Can we do it as well as least emissions intensive as possible? And the conversation that we were just having here about the efficiency of the nitrogen conversion into pounds of beef or whatever it may be, that seems to be a similar concept to intensity. How much ammonia potentially is coming off of a pound of cattle or a pound of pork or amount of eggs produced, and can we make that efficiency, that intensity, as low as possible through BMPs? And so I think that's a concept I would like to explore a little bit further in these upcoming conversations, because I think that gets to how do we do it as best as possible and make it as environmentally friendly as possible for the park, while to the points raised multiple times today, not
creating a additional burden that's going to drive those producers out of Colorado. I think that's the balance we're all trying to find and do it as well as we can.
And I would say, I mean, my understanding is up at the park, we're still in a pretty good zone in terms of protecting most things at the park. We're at a level where we're protecting just about everything except for the diatoms on most years. So also balancing that is, I mean, I get that that's where we want to be, but it seems to me like we're still in this pretty good zone of, I mean, there was all these worries about acidification and affecting trees and affecting wildlife, and we're nowhere near that, I don't think. I mean, I could be misunderstanding that, but I mean, striking that balance. And I appreciate that intensity discussion. That's a good perspective to have, and I'm glad to hear they're looking at that for oil and gas, because Colorado does have very strict regulations, and it's not going to be done better somewhere else.
Being new to this group, I really appreciate all this conversation. Thanks again, Julie, putting me on another committee. I love seeing you all the time, as well as the issue with, and Josh, you brought up something that's been in the back of my mind since 9:35 this morning. These programs are great. They're so important to the environment and the producers. As representative of industry that has gone through enormous regulations the last 3 years, and those led to legislation and how we run all of our farms. We have a commitment to making sure that we need to educate these legislators on the outcomes of the legislation that they are producing based on these type of studies and based on these type of conditions. I can tell you that having to testify this year, well, real quick story, 223, we had to go ahead and go to cage free, right? Had to be done in 3 years, right? Our farm spent $500 million to retrofit all their barns to cage free. And then what came up this year? They wanted to repeal it. They wanted to repeal it. And then at the same time, we made the argument of how inefficient it is in the areas of not feeding. Our farms are great at figuring out feed ratios and that type of thing. They're in the business. Our hands are in environmental control barns. God bless all 8.5 million of them now that we're getting back to repopulating. But the problem is that these pieces of legislation also really messed up our waste management and our inefficiency in feed. So I think we have some responsibility, and I'm excited to be here. Thank you. But I'm sitting here today after reviewing 17 different capstone projects from 5 different universities this year. This has been great. This has been great, and I appreciate all the input. I think we need to look at, and I think we've mentioned it, the outcome of this group. And I hope it never gets to regulatory and that it does stay in the best practices area.
All right. We're long and long. Is everybody okay to keep going, or are we ready to break? No, you've got to leave.
Oh, no, I'm staying now. I'm just going to watch it online. Sure. Yeah, it's too late for me to get there to see it in person.
Thank you, Bonnie.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're about to break for lunch, and feel free to stay and we can continue the conversation if you like in small groups and just sort of chat through this. I'm going to assume for the purposes of today then that we are agreed we want to pursue a June meeting with a focus on measurement or understanding of what's a balanced set of measures, right, that reflect sort of the maybe some hard and soft goals, as you put it, Dr. Overman. Well said, I thought. So I'll start to put together an agenda for that. The question will be about the timing for that. So I haven't had a chance to look at everybody's calendars, as I'm sure you haven't either. So, but if we took the next 20 minutes to just look at our calendars while we're eating a little bit, maybe we could do a quick poll or something to at least narrow it down to a couple options that would work for most of us here. And so before you left, we would have that at least a couple of options to put on the table. Fair enough?
For the people online, Brian, should they just drop in their availability or send you an email?
Yeah, that would help if we could just start with some dates to, and maybe you could look at those, Kate, to see what are some potentials, and then look at our calendars as well. So. Yeah, we're thinking looking at the balance between maybe the last 2 weeks of June, something like that. Give us time to wind up what we've learned here and think about some things. So that's just a general ballpark for now. Maybe we'll
I cannot do the 19th.
Okay. Okay. It's gonna be tough, huh?
So we're going to go cover 5. It's always covered.
Yeah, if there are hard dates that you can't do it, maybe just make, you've got some pink slips and a marker in front of it. If there's hard dates that you can't make, just start jotting those down. And maybe through process of elimination, we'll figure it out. I doubt we'll get everyone on short notice. You guys are really in demand out there in the world. So, but we'll do our best. And we'll record the meeting and share notes as always. If we get All right, are we ready for lunch then? I think that's a yes. We're ready? All right. So please take 20 minutes here, and we'll just do a quick pulse check on the dates before you leave, if that's all right. Thanks, everyone. Really good meeting. It's great. I really believe in the work. Yep, our food is over here in the back corner in the kitchen there. So go for it. I'm going to stop the recording now. Thanks, everyone. Or Kate, can you stop the recording?
Yes.